I am super excited to share this conversation with Robert Kiyosaki. I first had the chance to speak with him over 5 years ago before we had any of this studio. And now I got to go to Phoenix, Arizona to speak with this legend. He's the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is the #1 selling personal finance book of all time, over 30 million. And Robert has been there and done that. He started companies, built real estate empires, and taught people how to... And that's the thing about Robert. He had 2 dads when he was a kid. One was his natural dad, one was his best friend's dad, and one had a poor mentality and one had a rich mentality. A poor person says, how can I afford that? The rich person actually goes out and says, what can I do to make this a great investment? And so that's what I love about Robert. He always looks at things in a great talk about his career, his wife, his time in Vietnam, and what it's like to really understand, no, you're going to love it. But what I was really excited to do was help him launch America's first weekly, and this is a brand new way of making money. As a former Wall Street banker, I was super excited to share this type of investment strategy with the public for the very first time. You see, this is something we used to do in the banking industry all the time. And of course, as host of the event, I was able to secure exclusive rights to offer you. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Robert Kiyosaki, the entrepreneur, educator, and investor, best known as the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the #1 personal finance book of all time. You've challenged and changed the way tens of millions of people around the world think about money, and you become a passionate and outspoken advocate for financial education. I'm here on Scottsdale, Arizona. Robert, welcome back to London Real.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed our last interview.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It's been a great day here, and yesterday as well, spending time with you.
Yesterday was one of the highlights of my life, so it was fantastic.
Well, it was you and me and Jim Rickards. And why was that the highlight of your life? What was happening that day that made you feel that way?
Well, you ever seen a kid, like they're playing football or baseball, whatever the sport is, and they go onto the field and they meet their hero, they'd be like meeting David Beckham or, somebody like that. Well, to me, Jim Rickards and Naomi Prince and a lot of the people I run around with now were my heroes. I mean, they were the guys on the field. And I said, God, they're so smart. They're insiders into this world. And so to actually be sitting next to Jim and working on projects together, and I'm going, why am I here? So that would be like, David Beckham and I playing soccer together. I mean, it's not supposed to be possible, So hanging out with Jim Rickards and Naomi and you, and it's like it's not supposed to be. It's impossible. But dreams do come true.
Because you always thought you were the outsider, and now you're hanging out with the quote-unquote insiders, and
Correct.
You're agreeing on everything with them.
Correct. And a lot of people get financial advice from outsiders. If maybe a financial planner, a stockbroker, a real estate broker, but they're not on the inside of the deal. And one of the reasons I like being a real estate guy is I'm always trading from the inside. I know the deal, I'm part of the deal, I am the deal, But the average person who buys like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, and saves money, they're outsiders. They have no idea what's going on between them and the real world. So Jim Rickards and Naomi Prince, they were, Jim was with the CIA, long-term capital management, the Pentagon, and they're the inside on what's going on with money. Naomi Prince was with Solomon and Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs. They're insiders. And I was this little guy on the outside trying to figure out, what are those guys doing? How are it's almost like, what's the wizard doing? How is the wizard pulling these handles and all this? And outside jumping around doing as they tell us, you should save money. Okay, I'll save money. You should buy stocks. Okay, I'll buy stocks. You should put some money in bonds. Okay, I'll buy. And I said, there's a wizard in there. I want to know who that wizard is. And so Jim and these guys are as close to the wizard as I could get.
How does a 9-year-old kid in Hawaii, a poor kid, get to this point?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't poor by most people's standards, but I came from a family with a poor attitude, if you know what I mean. Because rich, poor, middle class, poverty starts with a fundamental attitude. So I was in Hawaii, I was 9 years old. My father was the head of education, PhD. Very smart man, good guy. And for some reason, we moved across town and I went to a school with rich kids. So this is a little town called Hilo, Hawaii. That's not on the map anywhere, but it is, plantation town. So when I was 9 years old, I moved to this rich kid's school. And suddenly I realized I was poor because it's relative, as Einstein, it's all relative. And my classmates were mostly white guys. And I was one of the few Asians in the class. And these guys, their fathers owned the banks, they owned the plantations, they owned the car dealerships, they owned the meat packing company, they owned the ranches. And I'm going, how come my dad doesn't own that? So I remember raising my hand when I was 9, my fourth grade teacher, and I said, when am I going to learn about money? And she was this woman who should have retired 50 years earlier. She was so sick and tired of kids by this time. She says, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I said, what am I, in Sunday school? And I was this punky little 9-year-old kid. And she says, we don't teach money at school. I said, why not? And she couldn't answer me. And she got very flustered. She said, sit down, take your seat. And then I got curious. I said, why don't we learn about money? She says, go ask your father. He's my boss. My father was the head of education. PhD, all that stuff. I go home and ask him, said, why don't we learn about money in school? He looked at me and said, because the government doesn't let us teach that subject. The government tells us what we can teach and what we can't teach. And I thought that was strange. And I said, but aren't we going to school to learn about money? He says, no, your job is to get a job. I said, but you get a job to earn money. He goes, no, you're supposed to just get a job. I went, no. Isn't the purpose of a job to earn money? He goes, you're correct. I said, so why don't I just learn about money? I can skip the job part, And he got flustered and he said, look, and my father was, for Japanese, very tall, 6'4", and imposing man, good guy. But he says, if you want to learn about money, why don't you ask your best friend's father about money? And I said, why? That's Mike. So why ask him? He says, because Mike's father is an entrepreneur. And I said, what are you? He says, I'm an employee. I'm a government employee. And I went, oh, what's the difference? He says, the difference is an entrepreneur must know about money, or they're no longer entrepreneurs. And he says an employee doesn't have to know anything about money, because the government will take care of them, the company will take care of them. So I'm all confused. But I took my dad's advice and I trundled over to Mike's father's office and knocked on his door and I said, hey, I'm here, 9 years old. Teach me about money. He says, beat it, kid, But that's where the story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad started. And finally, through persistence, my rich dad started teaching me about money on one condition. And that condition was he would never pay me. He says, the moment I pay you, you think like an employee. He says, that's the trap. Entrepreneurs work for free. And now I'm 9 years old, my head's going cracking in half. He says, you never want a paycheck. You understand that, kid? I said, okay, I got it. And he says, well, how do I make money? He says, that's what entrepreneurs figure out. It's like a cat, which comes first, a cat or the cat chasing its tail. And I said, so how do I learn about money? So he would just break out a Monopoly game board. So I would work for free. I'd pick up cigarette butts, and he had hotels and restaurants, and I would clean and do menial tasks. And as I got older, I started getting into office work and marketing and accounting, and I was an apprentice basically, but I always worked for free. And he would teach me about money. But the way he taught me about money was playing Monopoly. And finally one day I got upset. I said, well, when are you going to teach me about money? He says, what do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He goes, no. What do you think we're doing? We're playing Monopoly. He says, what do you think we're doing? I said, I don't know. I'm teaching you about money. And then that's when, you have one green house. He says, there's many formulas for great success in money. There's thousands of them. But one of the best ones found on the game of Monopoly. Still is today. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. I said, what? He says, one of the greatest ways to acquire great wealth is playing Monopoly in real life. 4 green houses, 1 red hotel. Well, is that all there is? He goes, that's it. And he says, what do you think I'm doing? And I went, I don't know. So then he took me out, he showed me his greenhouses. And 10 years later, when I was 19, I was now in school in New York, and I come back to Hawaii, and Rich Dad had bought the biggest piece of land smack dab in the middle of Waikiki Beach. And when you go to Waikiki Beach today, you'll see the Hyatt Regency Hotel. That was his hotel.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Just like the game of Monopoly.
Acquired assets and they became bigger assets.
He just kept what's called an assemblage, because that property wasn't that big at the time. So he had to buy out all the small guys. Because Waikiki was a little dirt water little town. So he'd buy out this shop owner and buy that shop owner. And it took him a while, but he finally assembled this large piece of property. And then he and Hyatt put up this giant hotel.
You know,
it just sold for $1 million.